And today we've got a great opportunity. We've got a panel of leaders and experts to help us explore that, to learn more about it, and to think about what it could look like. So I want to introduce Natalie Gawker, who's going to be moderating our panel. Natalie is an associate dean at the David Eccles School of Business. She's also the director of the Gardner Institute at the University of Utah. She served in the administrations of 3 governors, Bangerter, Leavitt, and Walker, and also served in the George W. Bush administration. Natalie is a thought leader. You can see her as a regular contributor in Utah Business Magazine and Deseret News. And she's also one of the hosts of the weekly radio program, Both Sides of the Aisle on KCPW. She's also one of the smartest and most pleasant people I know. So it's a pleasure for me to turn the time over to Natalie to introduce her and to let her lead this panel discussion. Welcome, Natalie.
Thank you so much, Kirk. That was a really kind introduction. And Misha, if you're still on, really loved your message. So thank you for sharing that. What a great way to wake up this morning. So as Kirk mentioned, I work at the David Eccles School of Business. I also direct the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute, and I'm going to be moderating a panel today on an inclusive recovery. And joining me, I have 3 community leaders who are not only leaders, but subject matter experts in the areas of multicultural issues, education issues, and community health issues. And so I want to welcome to the panel Mikelle Moore, who is a Senior Vice President over Community Health for Intermountain Healthcare, Sarah Young, who's the Director of Strategic Initiatives with the Utah State Board of Education, and James Jackson, the Founder and Executive Director of the Utah Black Chamber, and James is also a Vice President at Zions Bank. So thank you, 3 of you, for joining us. We're going to have a lively discussion here. I want to, kind of kick us off by just acknowledging the circumstances we find ourselves in. This is Mikelle, James, and Sarah just kind of setting the stage, right? So we've just had this historic election. It's ongoing. We have a public health crisis. We're in an economic recession. We have considerable unrest in our society. And we're going to just really explore, as we move from this time of tumult, how do we get to a better place? And we're defining a better place as an inclusive recovery. I've asked the United Way staff if they could to just put up a definition on the screen of what an inclusive recovery might look like, or how we might define it. This is a definition that comes from the Urban Institute. So I'll invite the panelists to look at this and read this, and our viewers as well. So an inclusive recovery occurs when a place overcomes economic distress in a way that provides the opportunity for all residents, especially historically excluded populations, to benefit from and contribute to economic prosperity. So that's the challenge. That's the definition that we want to look at. We want to look at it both to our nation and to our state. And I looked up the latest numbers just to make sure I had it right, but we presently have about 82,000 unemployed Utahns in our state. So that's the nature of the challenge. So with that as an introduction, let me just, James, I'm going to start with you. Not going to really ask a hard question now, but I just want to know how you're feeling, how you're approaching the day. Does that introduction make sense to you, James?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just grateful for the opportunity to participate in this panel this morning. I love that definition because that's something that we strive for within the Black Chamber, and something that we've been working with inside Bank Corporation, is finding an opportunity to create an equitable playing field for all people within not only the state of Utah, but just nationwide, working with other leaders across the country as well.
Yeah, I loved it when Misha said something to the effect, all people have dignity, and whether you're a supporter of one candidate or another candidate, you have dignity in my eyes. Mikelle, you're nodding. I want to just to break the ice. How does that introduction, does it ring true to you? Any introductory comments you want to make?
It really rings true. And, I think often we what we're seeing right now in our country is division, sometimes really politicized. And yet, when we talk about the human beings involved and what we want for one another as individual people, I think there's a lot more agreement. And so that definition around what does an inclusive recovery look like, kind of hard to argue with it, right? And I think if we can see each other as human beings and neighbors, we can really find common ground and move forward. And I think this experience of the pandemic is helping us to see things in a little different light. I hope, I'm optimistic, Natalie. We can move forward in a positive way.
You know, Mikelle, I'm feeling that this morning too, and that's part of how I wanted to start the panel. And Misha helped with that. Sarah, are you feeling optimistic this morning? Let's just let you share a little bit of your spirit today with everyone, and then we'll go to some substantive policy questions.
No, certainly, definitely optimism. I think is the key word in terms of kicking off our day. There's so many opportunities that this challenge has really enlightened for our community in K-12 education, whether it's providing broadband access to families and students that didn't previously had it, to being able to really personalize learning and meet the needs of individual families and students in a way we never have before. And I'm just really appreciative of Misha's message in terms of recognizing that those opportunities exist and that they're necessary for all of us to be able to contribute to and move forward with.
Yeah. Sarah, let's stick with you and hit you with a bit of a policy question. And to the panelists, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of you some lessons you've learned. And so Sarah, we're going to go right to education. And my understanding is that in the spring of 2020 that Salt Lake County and our local education leaders estimated that as many as 50% of students in some classrooms had not connected with their teachers since the COVID-19 pandemic hit. Just an extraordinarily high percentage. So distance learning goes into effect and half aren't in the game. I know that school officials are still getting a grasp on the numbers, you know, what fall is looking like and whatnot, but I just want to hear your comments about how this plays out. Is it true that these people aren't connecting? And then tell us the characteristics of the people that aren't connecting.
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I think, you know, the shift to remote learning, where we were asking for the learning to happen outside of the traditional four walls of the school building and the classroom to the home, really highlighted a lot of inequities that we have, not just here in Salt Lake City, but really across the state of Utah, in terms of expectations that students had opportunities to be able to do digital connection with their teachers in their schools. And so starting in the spring, it was definitely highlighted as kind of a key need and has been something that the system has been working on collectively to be able to address across the state. Currently speaking, we have over $5 million as a system invested in providing broadband solutions to students and households in K-12 education for this current school year. And so we are making great strides in that. I'll also say that really the lead work and the thing that we have found most is that school is a community effort. It is something that involves not just our teachers, but it really involves our parents and our families to be able to support those individual students. And it's something that I think really then leads to the ultimate must-have foundation for education, which is relationships. So a lot of times in our previous system, we really found that a school might be kind of an island, somewhere you sent your kids to during the day and they returned back and you hoped everything had gone well. Whereas the pandemic has really highlighted that no, education is a shared endeavor. It's something that involves parents, it involves grandparents, it involves businesses, it involves our schools and our teachers. And that we really need to start with those relationships in terms of being able to create the inclusive recovery to meet our students with the highest needs.
Yeah. So Sarah, if I were to summarize that, I can't do it really well, but we need to invest in, you know, remote learning capacities. Education's a community endeavor. and it's a shared experience for us. Something along those lines. Interesting. James, I'd love to hear your comments along the same lines. So this pandemic hits, all these, the virus spreads, and we get immediate and quick indications that it's affecting communities of color at greater, degree than the overall population. So we see these disparities. And I'd just love to hear your comment on what you've learned since the dreaded mid-March time period.
Yes, thank you. It's when the pandemic hit, and when you run an organization that serves small businesses, and you see the impact that's happening, and you sit there and stare and wonder, what can I do? You're not going to go out there and ask businesses to renew their membership. You're not going to, you can't hold any events, and so you're how you serve businesses in the past. So one lesson I've learned is you have to be able to pivot, and pivot fast. When desperation calls for the small business community that impacts our state and our nation so much, I expand on the old African proverb of it takes a village to raise a child, but it takes a village to raise a village. And we're stronger together. And so we have to lean on each other to find opportunities to serve those businesses that are in crises. And even though the government tried to help with the CARES Act, it disproportionately impacted those in the majority, where the communities of color did not have those access. So going back to Sarah's point regarding education, it goes at the business level as well, because we found that communities of color did not have the proper access, education, or resources to take advantage of many of those opportunities that existed. And so we were just communicating left and right about, because we had to expand outside of our own bubble, because some businesses did not have the resources that we've been trying to share for so long. And so it's more than just who our niche is and who we connect with. We had to reach even further beyond the communities of color that we engage with, because even though Utah is so small, there's still those that are left outside of that circle that you connect with. And we had to make a more intentional effort to reach beyond and connect with those businesses and try to educate them about access and resources, and even how to work harder about being intentional, because we just can't go knock on the door. We can't host an event to invite those businesses to meet a banker, to meet the Small Business Development Center. It was a bunch of Zoom calls and email intros and regular phone calls. That actually picking up the phone and talking to people was something that we did prior to text messaging and Zoom calls and everything. And so, I had to get used to holding my phone to my ear and then buying a headset to talk more on my phone. But so what I really learned from that is intentionality, get outside your bubble, and that we have to build more bridges.
Wow. There's a lot of wisdom there, James. So this has been really hard on small business. It's required that you pivot and pivot fast, got to lean on each other, and you really learned a lot about intentionality in the face of a crisis.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. So Mikelle, you've got it hard on the education, got it hard on small businesses, particularly owned and run by people of color. And then you've got the problem of health disparities during a public health emergency. Give us the message there and the lesson you've learned since March.
Well, Natalie, I'll start even before March. The efforts that Sarah's describing and James are describing, we've recognized, right, that education, having a good job, these things determine health more than the healthcare we're delivering in our health systems today. And so we've been, as an industry and at Intermountain, trying to figure out, how do you address these social issues that influence health, and working on how do we understand people's needs beyond their healthcare needs so that we can address them holistically as we meet needs. And COVID has, I'm probably too optimistic sometimes, but COVID has greatly accelerated our understanding of social determinants of health, from something very academic to something very actionable. And we've seen that as we see the disparities that have shown up during COVID by the work environments that people of color faced compared to whites on the whole. We saw much more exposure to COVID in the early days and continued to see disparities in the treatment and access to testing and other things as well. And so this has really forced a rethinking of the way that we're delivering care in real time. So we are now referring people who test positive for COVID-19 to community health workers if they're high risk, and community health workers are asking if they have need for food, rental assistance, assistance paying their mortgage, childcare assistance, and trying to connect those dots. We're also inviting community health workers and others to help explain complex treatments like the use of remdesivir and other things, because we know that having cultural competency in communicating a message, even around treatment, is going to influence who accepts that treatment. And we don't want to see disparities in what people have opportunity to have in treatment for the disease. So the kind of rapid improvement, continuous improvement approach to how we see the disparities in real time and change our processes to address them is going to have long-term impacts in the way that we deliver healthcare, well beyond COVID. And I'm really sad that we're experiencing those disparities, and I'm hopeful that having this opportunity that's uniting all of us and wanting to resolve them carries forward, because these same disparities exist in diabetes, substance use, heart disease, et cetera.
Mikelle, very well said. So disparities have existed, or health disparities have been around for a long time. That's not new. The social determinants of health, or things outside of the healthcare system, are incredibly important to our health. And you're really rethinking how you provide care. That one of the lessons learned from COVID is we're different now.
Right.
I'm going to go off script just a little bit. I noticed that United Way has given me the ability to share screen, so I'm not going to hesitate to do that. I'm just going to put up a quote here, because as I listened to you, this quote came to mind. Arundhati Roy is an author that I follow, and she made this comment. She said, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. So here we are on this panel. We got, insightful subject matter experts, and we're talking about what's next, what comes next. And I just want to editorialize that I was on a call last night with a woman named Betsy Duke. Betsy is a former governor in the Federal Reserve System. So she mingles with some of the most important economic thinkers in our country. So she's given an update to some people, some leaders in our community. But she talked about affordable housing, and she talked about all these incredibly important issues, new monetary policy, on and on. But one of the things that she spent the most time on is talking about a K-shaped recovery, or K-shaped economy. And you all know how the alphabets work. The V is this rapid comeback. You drop and you come back. U is the dreaded, you're down for a long time and then you come back. You've heard of the W, where you have the double dip. But the evidence seems increasingly clear, and it was reminded to me last night that we're experiencing a K-shaped recovery. And that is that certain people, certain industries, certain places are doing well and others are left behind. So in that spirit, Mikelle, I just want to stick with you for 1 second. In your world, in the healthcare world, does it feel K-shaped to you?
Yeah, it really does, Natalie. Intermountain has a financial assistance policy that we are always trying to make sure is meeting the needs of our community. And, as we think about how the need for that is going to play out over the long term, we are anticipating more people becoming uninsured or accessing care through Medicaid and other government assistance. And some employers really looking for ways to change their health expense. and for others to continue to grow and boom. And we see a need to really ensure that that overall we're driving towards greater affordability for all people, and that that we're making sure that we have systems and programs that serve both needs. But you know, it raises for me this idea that there are certain things that we have to create as a baseline in our communities if we want to combat the impacts of this. And Sarah, your comment about access to internet, and James, your comment around literacy and understanding how to access things, we have got to, Natalie, kind of change what the baseline is. Internet access is a basic utility today. We need a level playing field for all people to have access to that type of connectivity in our communities. And we need to focus on how do we get more of the right information in front of people and remove some of the misinformation that's getting in the way of creating that literacy, whether it's health literacy or business literacy or literacy for the purpose of education and learning, if we want to help support all people in this K-shaped recovery.
Yeah. So Sarah, K-shaped in education, is that how you're seeing it?
You know, so I think it, not to coin a new phrase, but is a little more like an F, where we have kind of two parallel lines that have never really reached any sort of intersection or apex in terms of the students that we serve. And I think it's important to note that that has existed in K-12 education since before the pandemic. There were students who were not being served by the traditional system. And so having an opportunity to then re-envision what that looks like, instead of really providing a one-size-fits-all single classroom education, to moving towards a personalized education and a personalized learning lens, where we're really designing opportunities for students, not at a systems level, but really at the individual level, is such a great opportunity to move us away from these two parallel tracks that really just never were having any sort of kind of indications or trends that they would merge, to being able to say, no, we are serving all of our kids. But that's going to take a huge investment in the system and multiple changes in regards to policy and how we approach learning as a community.
Yeah. Sarah, I love your cleverness there, because the easy answer was say, yeah, it's a K, but you introduced a whole new letter. James, in small business, are you seeing a K? Is it more like what Sarah's describing, that it's just, you know, both kind of in parallel lines, but there's division? What are you seeing in your world in small business, whether it's at Zion's or at the Black Chamber?
Yeah, I kind of like Sarah's letter F there. You know, when we go into the K, we see
a bad connotation in education.
I know it is, but I do see the frame of reference of a K, because when we look at the businesses, how there's a lot of businesses closing, but the Black and other communities of color, their businesses are closing down at an alarming rate. You know, I can speak on behalf of the Black businesses across the country. 40% of them are not going to reopen. And it's mainly because it's going right back to education. I remember when I started at the bank as a small business banker, serving the diverse communities. And there was one particular prospect I was talking to, had a great vision, doing awesome things, was looking for a little bit more access to capital. And so when I asked for some documents to process his loan, I was almost embarrassed for him that he did not fully understand what I meant by those documents. You know, his tax return that he gave me wasn't, you know, it was filled out in pencil, and it was on paper, and it was really discouraging for me to see someone with that kind of vision, who had an awesome product that he wanted to do, and he showed some had a portfolio built already. But then what this pandemic showed is that it highlighted that, exposed that even more, of how when we go to access certain capital, that small businesses are more scrutinized because of those type of examples, where they don't receive the same amount of follow-up appointments. And we look at Black women-owned businesses, they're 3 times less likely to be approved to get any type of loan. So what it really comes down to is that we need to figure out a way to automate the process a little bit more. So we stray away from the K, to kind of bring businesses back up so we can get to the F, because we do need a little bit more attention built while we still have the businesses that are up here having the relationship with the bankers, having the access to those resources, that do have the education. We do have to, there's another layer there. We have to pay a little bit more attention in order to elevate that second line in that F up to the other level, to provide them a little more education, some just foundational one-on-one framework, so they understand, the importance of financial literacy education, what documents are required to obtain a loan. One of the main reasons why communities of color didn't receive much of the PPP program was because they didn't understand the paperwork. They didn't have access to the banking relationships. And so everything comes down, when it talks about health, when we talk about education, when it talks about business, all comes down to just the basic education, not only from where Sarah is, and just the formal education, but we need education around health, we need education around business, and it takes all of us who are in those areas to provide the education to help elevate these businesses, so we're all leveling that playing field.
Well, those are all really important observations. As an economist, I've had this sort of mantra as I've looked at the pandemic, to say that it's created a rapid acceleration of trends that were already in play. We just know that in remote work or remote sales or telehealth, Mikelle, other things. But James, you remind us and the other panelists that this pandemic has put a really bright light on existing disparities, challenges in our community. And I love the idea that here in Utah, not only are we better positioned because of the way our economy has functioned through all of this, we have more degrees of freedom, is how an analyst might say, but we have the economy is relatively less hard hit here in Utah than in other places. And I hope it gives us more capacity to recover to better, is the way I'm trying to say that. So Sid Dixon, we are, superintendent of public instruction. I'm sure there's some other more formal titles, but Sid basically has the stewardship of public education in our state. And she talks about reimagining the future. And so let's take just a second, Mikelle, and let's do it kind of briefly, but if you reimagine the future for healthcare, what are the touch points you'd highlight?
Oh, there's a lot to reimagine there, Natalie, but I think
I agree with you, Mikelle.
lots of opportunity, but I think the future is one of greater affordability and greater equity, and the two go hand in hand. As we think about how to use telehealth and digital solutions, we improve the access, certainly, for rural communities, for people with transportation barriers, even language barriers, and that improves equity. As we think about how to connect with people in ways that are more respectful of how they want to connect with us, and more culturally appropriate through community health workers and other types of individuals, we enhance the care team, and we move beyond a traditional mindset of doctor and nurse to a team that includes family, includes community health workers, includes teachers or school nurses as connectors, and we really improve affordability, and we change access in a way that creates an equitable opportunity and equitable outcome. So that's the future I imagine, Natalie.
I'll just say editorially, Mikelle, we're so glad you're a senior leader in helping to make that happen. I'm always so impressed with Mikelle's leadership. I always tell people that Mikelle used to be the hospital administrator at LDS Hospital. So imagine how complicated that would have been. And now you got the whole system.
Well, it's a good contrast. It's nice to have seen both.
Sarah, how do you reimagine the future in education?
Yeah, so Dr. Dixon with our agency is really leading a change in terms of shifting our system away from a standard one size fits all to really meeting the personalized learning needs of every single child. And one component of that I'd highlight is our Utah Portrait of a Graduate, which really looks to expand our expectations for students upon exiting the system beyond just academic mastery. Although that's clearly a foundational component, we really need to look at additional skills and literacies to what James and Mikelle have shared, whether that's digital literacies, communication, financial literacy, moving into having a broader vision of what it means to really educate and prepare a child for their future opportunities. And so that's the direction that we're heading in Utah with the reimagining of education. But it's going to take a team, to Mikelle's point. It's not something that one school or one teacher or even one agency can do alone.
James, bring us home on this question with just the idea being, what are you reimagining for small businesses moving forward?
Now that we've seen, everyone has seen that systemic racism still exists in all areas, is that, what are we going to do next? And so we need to figure out what type of automation processes could we put in place to remove any type of biases that may come into play when we're looking at loan files or any type of funding requests for small businesses. And what can we do to systematically get things moving a little bit faster? And looking at more like the CDFIs, the Community Development Financial Institutions, providing more access to those type of organizations, because there's a lot of businesses out there that, they're not looking for the $50,000, $100,000, $250,000 loans. They just need just a little bit of a mark loan just to get them out of the bottleneck that they're in, or just to elevate them to the next level just a little bit, where maybe they're just looking for a $5,000, $10,000 loan. So, just more access to funding overall at all different levels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. James, what's the risk if we don't step into the future and accept a little bit more risk? But, I feel this compelling need to change.
Yeah,
when
we just think
about if we don't change?
When we think about the, a quote that I remember hearing is that, opportunities are not lost, they're just found by someone else. And we have an amazing opportunity right now that we are aware, we're becoming more educated, is that there's that risk, and with the greater risk, there's a greater reward. And diversity adds dividends. It adds dividends to your internally, to your company, to your organization, to your community, to your state, and to your nation. And so what are you willing to do to invest into diversity, to equip them with the proper resources, access, and education? Because overall, that helps the community thrive as a whole.
Yeah. So when Mikelle, Sarah, when I hear James talk like that, he's basically making the case for bold action. Like, go ahead and take risks in this environment, take risks. And I think I know the answer to this, but I want to make sure that I let you all share it with our audience. So Sarah and Mikelle, what is the bold action that we need to see? In education, Sarah, what's that bold action that we need to see?
So I think the really bold action starts with a guarantee for broadband in the households for every single one of our K-12
okay,
students.
That's like Mikelle said, that it is a utility. It is a vital utility, just like water, power, sewer, broadband. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, and I really feel strongly that degree of access is what will host the reimagining of education, because that's really where we build into the technologies to personalize learning for our kids, create more options around the access that our students have to great teachers and great coursework, and then pathways to careers. So I think that if I had to choose one bold action that was necessary, it is that guarantee for all of our households in the state of Utah.
Really interesting. As I have, I think, really good internet connection, but I'm probably like a lot of you, I got a little cord along the floor that I've got like tape on that goes back to, it's not coming out of the wall right where my computer is. Let's just put it that way. Future's got to change. Mikelle, bold action. What's the bold action you'd highlight in the health system?
The bold action, Natalie, in healthcare, I think, you're an economist, you understand this very well. It's changing the incentives so that doing what's right for all people becomes what's driving all of us forward. And for us in healthcare, that means shifting the mindset of healthcare from something that's a transaction, something you doctors are paid to do procedure by procedure, to a motivation and an incentive around health, around keeping people well and healthy through the course of a lifetime, from wherever they're starting today. If we have that incentive, which we do at Intermountain for about half of our patients that we care for, and we don't care, we're all in, it drives us to think critically about what are our opportunities to impact the care we're delivering today so that we keep someone healthy forever, as healthy as possible. And it motivates us to actually look for those disparities. Where are the people that are being left behind? And what about the way we're delivering that care can change so that everyone has that equal opportunity to live the healthiest life possible?
Yeah. I'm going to ask each of you to respond to this. I'll stick with you, Mikelle, but it's, you know, a lot of what we're talking about relates to both the nation and to Utah. No question about it. But I'd love to just, what makes it different here, Mikelle? In other words, in Utah, you got these disparities and whatnot, but what should we be mindful of that makes our circumstances in health disparities different in Utah?
Well, I think for one, and you commented on this, Natalie, that we're starting from maybe a place of where we have room for more optimism. There are disparities, while they're heartbreaking and real, they are less than many other places across the country. And we have a community that has demonstrated over and over again an ability to come together to solve complex problems. And I truly believe that the level, you know, those two things combined here means we can do this. We can be a kind of a beacon of hope for how to do this across the country. It might be difficult for us to apply the lessons learned that we create here in some place like New York or Baltimore, places, you know, highly urban places with complexities, but most of the country is not that. And we can do something here that becomes the way forward for a lot of our country and helps to shift a mindset.
Yeah, I love that. James, I'll go to you next on this same kind of question. What makes Utah different here? And just as a reminder to our viewers, right now, so 7 months out from the real onset of the pandemic in a significant way in our country, where the nation is today economically is where we were back in April. So in other words, we've progressed and gotten a little bit better. We still have tons of challenges, but at our very worst moment, we're at where the nation is 7 months later. So that's just a really telling, statistic about our state. So James, what would make Utah different here from the small business perspective?
I'm a big Pittsburgh Steelers fan. And one thing about Pittsburgh is that it has more bridges than any other area of the country. But when it comes to Salt Lake, when we're talking about social impact, we are like the most dynamic bridge builders in the country. We are great at collaborating. We're great at partnering. I think about what we do as an organization within the Black Chamber. I mean, that's how we thrive. And we work with so many different people and organizations to figure out, like Mikelle saying, how to solve complex problems. We are great at, using everybody's minds to come together to brainstorm. We're not so ego driven. We're always collaborating and working together to kind of figure things out. Chris Peterson and Spencer Cox are a great example of what Utah is overall, that we always strive to try to find opportunities to work together. And that's why Utah kind of thrives as one of the top economies of the state, because we have that type of culture that's built within our communities. And so that's kind of where I see us, and that's what I've experienced here as we grow in a business community, is that we have the resources, we have the access. Now it's just a matter of continuing building those bridges to make those opportunities more visible.
Love that. I want to say, I just wrote an article for a national journal called American Affairs. And they came to me. They called me and said, we're looking at Utah. We're really interested. We know you lead a policy institute. Would you be willing to contribute an article? And the topic was Utah's economic exceptionalism, which I was really uncomfortable authoring, right? Just because it seems like, we don't have problems and issues here, which we do. But it really gave me an interesting time to reflect on how our social mobility is good here in Utah. Our income equality is actually really good here in Utah. Got a long ways to go, lots of improvement. But when I listen to you and Mikelle, I'm reminded that we can progress. And Bill Krim actually helped me with the article because I highlighted the Utah Compromise on LGBTQ issues. I highlighted the Utah Compact on immigration issues, and I highlighted the Promise Partnership from the United Way. So I'm all in with what you're saying, that we have a secret sauce here that solves problems, prevents problems, acknowledges problems. Sarah, you get the last word on this topic, and then I'm going to ask you for some advice.
Yeah. So, I think one of the things that we have going for us here in Utah in regards to education are the investments that we've already made in some of these innovations. It is not lost on me that as the state of Utah, we went from closing down schools to 2 days later offering school learning opportunities remotely, whereas other states took weeks, if not the shutdown for the entire rest of the school year. So we have a really good infrastructure there in terms of being able to leverage some of these innovations. And I think the other piece is just how nimble we are. We are fortunate to be the state size that we are. And we really do, to both James and Mikelle's point, leverage those relationships and those partnerships to be able to engage in quick action, to change policies and to create partnerships to really change the outcomes of the system based on the current environment.
Okay, so I don't want to be a Debbie Downer. We've had so much good spirit and optimism, so I'm going to be careful not to turn that. But we are in a bit of a mess right now. Just the reality is that we have these soaring case counts. We have, some behavior in our community that is not helping. And I just, I want to give you each the opportunity to give some advice to our newly elected, or our governor-elect, Spencer Cox. So, we're going to have a new governor. He's going to go through a transition, but he's stepping into office during really perilous times. I mean, let's just be honest, right? It's not, we're not sleeping well given the reality of this virus. It's winter. CDC pays a visit to our state, paints a picture of if what happened in Montana and North Dakota happens in Utah, we're going to have 5 times the troubles we're having right now. I'm getting to the Debbie Downer point. I better be careful. But Mikelle, let's go to you first. What advice do you want to give our governor-elect in terms of, economic inclusion and inclusive recovery? What advice do you want to give him?
Well, I think, to your points, Natalie, it's hard to ignore kind of where we are with this disease right now. And I think our response to managing it while we're in a surge, and a surge that could frankly get worse, is going to be really important. And I know that Governor-elect Cox won't take leadership for a couple of months here. And but I hope he will use his voice to influence the way that we think about the pandemic and our individual behaviors as having opportunities to save fellow humans and to protect our caregivers who are providing healthcare during this time. So I hope he'll use his voice to help bring us together around the things we can do to keep our community well as possible. And I think that message then extends directly to this idea of an inclusive recovery, whether it's creating the equitable opportunities for education, for work, for health. His voice, his leadership matters so much in terms of setting the right tone and encouraging us all to line up in a united way to work for what we all want in our communities. So that would be my encouragement to him, is to be bold and never underestimate the power that he has through his influence to change the way we all think about what we're facing right now.
Yeah, very well said, Mikelle. Who wants to go next? We can go to you, James. Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, so it's something I've been preaching about for the last several months. You know, it's that, and it takes a lot of energy, right? We're investing in, you know, we're looking for ways to invest in education, looking for ways to invest in healthcare, looking for ways to invest in business. But what we really need to take time to do is invest in connection, right? We need to listen to understand rather than listen to respond. And so if you can imagine us, you know, being on two separate islands, like you were saying, Natalie, that we have these anti-maskers over here, we have these maskers over here. And all we're doing is going back and forth. And the only way that we can bring these two islands together is that if we bring a bridge down, right? And right now we have these walls up. And so when we listen to understand, you know, going to Brene Brown's definition of connections, where people feel seen, valued, and heard. And in order to do that, it takes intentional listening, right? And leading with sincere curiosity, because we're all conditioned a certain way. When we think about why we're divisive right now, is because we're listening and watching and hearing what others are saying, and that's triggering our brain and having us conditioned in such a way that we can't see the other side and what they're seeing. We thinking they're crazy, and we're thinking the other side is crazy. But in order to find that common ground to where we can actually resolve this crisis faster, is that it takes that energy, that investment, to actually listening to everyone's perspective and leading in with that sincere curiosity, so we can actually bring that walls down and build this bridge where we can find that common ground, and where we can now actually identify these solutions, right? Why do we have this sort of behavior that's not helping our community? You know, what are they listening to, reading, and watching that's leading them in this direction? How can I find a response to how we can find just a little bit of progression here on gaining some of their perspective, so we can lean in, be more available and humble enough to understand where they're coming from, and then conversely, they'll be able to do the same, and we'll be able to start finding some solutions. But really, it takes that investment in connection. I think that's where we're struggling right now, and I'm hopeful in this transition as we go into 21 that we start seeing that a lot more.
Love it, James. That's some great wisdom there. Sarah, we'll let you have the last word. I wanted you to give some advice on inclusive recovery to our governor-elect.
Thank you. You know, so we talk a lot in the pandemic about frontline workers, especially in the healthcare system. And my piece of advice would really be related to education, that our frontline workers are our teachers. That is where our students and our families have the direct, opportunities to connect with an individual. And they're the ones who are creating the solutions and the learning opportunities that are necessary to be able to not just provide education, but also to connect a lot of these families with different services that are available through the state. So my one piece of kind of recommendation would be, in the same way that we are saying you should, invest in our pandemic response through the healthcare system, you need to invest in our teachers in regards to supporting them and giving them the resources that they need to be able to make it through this trying time.
Wow. Okay, that is terrific. I've taken a couple of notes, so I'm just going to kind of summarize this, and I'll turn it back to Kirk. But we started out with a lot of optimism and positivity, so good on you. It's a good way to start the day, and definitely needed. We really acknowledged the disparities, and I thought it was interesting that Mikelle pointed out they existed before. Let's not forget that, and they're with us now. I think there was an overall recognition of connection in so many ways. And, Kirk started us out by saying we need a declaration of interdependence. And then that just continued, I heard in all of your comments. I heard a lot of talk about investment, the need to invest in the future, whether it's broadband or other things, in education and teachers. And then James, you make the point to invest in connecting. I felt like we really made the case that change is key, have a willingness to change, take that risk, that bold action is required, doing what's right for all people. And then I liked, Mikelle, your expression of optimism that Utah can be a beacon of hope. It's actually a mantle we wear. People watch us, see what we do. I loved, James, your point of being dynamic bridge builders. And then on the leadership front, we need our leaders to be bold, set the tone, to communicate, to unite us, and to really listen. So I hope that's at least a broad overbrush of what we've talked about. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you, James, Sarah, and Mikelle. And I'm going to turn the time back over to Kirk.